Good morning, everybody. Mestre Sucuri coming to you from Tokyo, Japan. I have a very special episode 102. Berimbau, the voice of resistance, the soul of capoeira. Welcome back to Mestre Vibes podcast, the space where rhythm meets resistance, where culture breathes, and where we walk together through the ancestral path of capoeira. Today, I want to talk about something close to all of our hearts, the berimbau. Not just an instrument, not just a bow with a gourd, but a spirit, a guide, a warrior's whisper across time. Have you ever wondered how the berimbau came into capoeira? Who brought it? Why it became the heartbeat of our art? Today, we go back, way back, to Africa, to the roots, to the heartbeat of the ancestors. The berimbau, as we know it today, is deeply rooted in Central and Southern Africa, especially among Bantu-speaking peoples. There, in places like Angola and Congo, existed similar musical bows known by names like bulumbumba, ungu, or urukungo. These instruments used a gourd as a resonator and a stick to strike the string, just like the berimbau. But in Africa, the musical bow was more than music. It was used in rituals, in storytelling, in spiritual ceremonies. It was sacred. It was a sacred tool, a way to communicate with the divine, with nature, with each other. Its sound could summon, soothe, or protect. The people who played the berimbau, or the early versions of the berimbau, were not just musicians. They were keepers of memory, guardians of vibrations. When Africans were taken from their homelands and enslaved in Brazil, they brought more than their bodies. They brought their rhythms, their resistance, their instruments. The musical bow crossed the Atlantic with the enslaved, hidden in memory, in ritual, in practice. It was likely brought to Brazil by enslaved Kikongo or Kimbundo speakers from what is now Angola and Congo. These groups formed a large part of the African population in colonial Bahia and other regions during the early days of slavery. In Brazil, the instrument transformed, surviving, adapting, and becoming the berimbau. The gourd became the cabaça, the wooden bow, the verga, and the coin or stone, the dobrão. Its spirit remained the same, a vessel of connection and protection. At first, the berimbau was played in street performances and religious ceremonies. It was used by candomblé practitioners, street vendors, and entertainers. But eventually, it found its deepest voice in capoeira. Capoeira was born in the senzalas and quilombos, shaped by pain, survival, and joy. At some point in the 19th century, especially in Bahia, the berimbau became central to the capoeira roda. Why? Because capoeira is not just about the body, it's about the rhythm, the call, the energy. And the berimbau is all of that, the conductor, the guide, the gatekeeper of the roda. Capoeiristas begin to respond to the berimbau's rhythm, to play faster, slower, more sly, more direct, depending on what the toki called for. The Angola game emerged from the slow, cunning rhythm of the Angola toki, while the more upright and aggressive Sambeto Grande de Regional called for speed and strength. Mestres like Pastinha, Bimba, Valdemar, Canjiquinha all played with deep respect for the berimbau. Mestre Bimba even used the berimbau in his sequências de ensino, integrating it into a formal method of instruction. And over time, the berimbau became the soul of capoeira and its main symbol. Today, the berimbau is not optional in capoeira, it's essential. It sets the rhythm, it controls the roda, it commands respect. It teaches you to listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole being. If you don't listen to the berimbau, you're not really playing capoeira, you're just kicking. In the roda, the berimbau can summon games, stop games, bless moments, or test players. It can speak joy, danger, laughter, or warning. And spiritually, The berimbau connects us to the ancestors. Its sound vibrates something older than words, deeper than movement. When we hold the berimbau, we hold a weapon of culture, a tool of resistance, a legacy of survival. It is both shield and sword. It is both drum and player. So next time you see the berimbau hanging on the wall or feel its string vibrate under your fingers, don't just see an instrument, see a history of survival. See the spirit of Angola, see the breath of your mestre, your lineage, your roots. Because without the berimbau, capoeira loses its voice. And we are not here to be voiceless. Capoeira teaches us to fight, to dance, to think. But most of all, it teaches us to listen. And the berimbau is our first teacher. I'm going to leave you guys with a couple of questions. Things for you guys to reflect on. When was the last time you truly listened to the berimbau, not just heard it, but felt it? What does your berimbau practice say about your connection to capoeira's roots? How can we honor the African lineage of the berimbau in our daily training in rodas? Muito obrigado for being here. If this episode resonated with you, share it with your fellow capoeiristas and consider joining me on the Patreon platform at Mestre Vibes on Patreon, where we dive even deeper into the music, history, and the spirit of capoeira. Ashe, and I'll see you all in the next roda. Lots of love, lots of peace, lots of capoeira. Mestre Sucuri, Tokyo, Japan. But before I leave you, I'm going to leave you with a song that Mestre Linguista and I recorded. I recently checked on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description. This song has gotten over 50,000 views. Instrumental, leading by the berimbau.